If you hear me preach often, you realize that I normally start out my sermon with a story of some kind of story out of my life or out of the church, some attention-grabbing ploy. I'm convinced that if you don't grab people's attention from the beginning, you won't have their attention for very long. They zone out or they fall asleep. Well, from my perspective today, I don't need any kind of contemporary story to tell you. I just need to put before your face Luke's story from Acts, which speaks of a eunuch, a castrated man, the sudden emergence of water in the desert, and Philip's magical disappearing act. This is enough to grab my personal attention, and I hope it's enough to grab your attention. Now, I have to tell you, I do not know many stories about eunuchs. And honestly, I don't think I want to hear stories about eunuchs. Talking about eunuchs just gives me a very sick spot in my stomach. But there is something very fascinating about Luke's eunuch today. He's from Ethiopia in Africa, and his main job is to take care of the money of the kingdom. We probably would call him the secretary of the treasury, meaning that he is in the inner circle of the queen's crowd. He's a big deal, he's a big wig, and he's also a eunuch. Now, some eunuchs were eunuchs by birth. They just came that way. Some castrated themselves. But most became eunuchs because the job demanded it. Now, there are a lot of jobs that I would take if I needed a paycheck, but I promise you this is not one of them. This eunuch job was a civil service job. You were working for the government, often among a group of women. If you were a eunuch, you weren't a threat to the women. Now, I could tell you some more about eunuchs, but I am afraid that the sermon would quickly become R-rated. But what you need to know is that eunuchs were not viewed particularly highly by Jews. They were thought to be unclean. But it's a eunuch who meets up with Philip, a disciple of Jesus, who was led by an angel to get off the couch in order to head south from Jerusalem. William Loader says that eunuchs were thought to be faulty forms of the human race. They were considered mutilated people. They were cut off from their ability to aid in reproduction. They lacked the bodily fluids that held the very power of life, so these sexually different people were often viewed with great disdain. And frankly, they weren't allowed in the temple. The latter part of the book of Isaiah takes on this prohibition, dreaming a dream when eunuchs will be allowed in the temple. Luke's story is giving us a vision of the fulfillment of Isaiah's dream, I think, as he tells us about the eunuch who meets up with Philip. Now, interestingly enough, this eunuch, so Luke tells us, had been up to Jerusalem for worship. Was he a convert to Judaism, a proselyte as we would call them, or was he just a God-fearer, an interested Gentile in the religion of Judaism? We don't know, but it's clear that the eunuch has been to Jerusalem for worship, Jewish worship. And as he is returning home, he is discovered by Philip, who finds him reading out loud the Jewish scriptures. The book of Isaiah, Isaiah 53 in particular. When the eunuch gets to the part that reads, like a sheep he was led to the slaughter, and like a lamb silent before its shearer, so he does not open his mouth, he says to Philip, well, who is this all about? Philip, responding like a good Lutheran and probably not a good Bible scholar, says, well, this is living word. This is a word that speaks to us now. This is about Jesus. For you see, he was innocent, And he was not able and did not open up his mouth. He was denied justice. His life was cut off from the earth. He was killed and he was crucified. Now, the eunuch is so intrigued by this story about Jesus that when he and Philip come upon some water that just so happened to magically show up in the desert, says, "What could prevent me from being baptized?" "Well, Mr. Eunuch, you're a eunuch. That is what should prevent you." But no, that is not Philip's response. Philip is being driven, you see, by the Spirit of God. And the Spirit of God is taking the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, further and further and further into the world. The Spirit of God, the Spirit of Christ, is not about collapsing people into their own little private worlds or keeping people out. The Spirit of Christ is not a spirit of exclusion, but a spirit of inclusion. Now, I know that many of you realize that quite a few scientists these days, building on the Big Bang Theory, are telling us that the universe is actually expanding. Now, my little brain is too undeveloped for me to fully grasp this concept. But if it is true, I am struck by the notion that reality itself, call it the universe, is not contracting but growing. Reality does not support our human tendency to withdraw, to make our world smaller and smaller. Reality, Luke and Acts would say, the Spirit is pushing us toward a bigger world, a larger life. The Spirit of Christ is a spirit of inclusion. So, is there anything that is preventing the eunuch from being baptized? After all, water has magically appeared in the wilderness, which, by the way, is how it often works in the realm of God. What's needed shows up. Odd, weird things happen. Old people have babies. The youngest and least experienced become kings. Virgins conceive. Killed people are raised from the dead. When dealing with God, you should just expect water to show up in the wilderness. And it does for this eunuch. And so there is absolutely no reason why he can't be baptized, which is what happens. And the Bible tells us, and this is so wonderful, both he and Philip go down in the water. Both he and Philip are immersed into the depths of the story of Jesus. You see, this discipleship thing is a shared journey. We get wet together, Philip and the eunuch alike. The Gospel of John tells us today that following Jesus is a shared journey, that discipleship puts us in a dependent kind of state. John tells us that Jesus is the vine and we are the branches. Getting where we want to go in life involves abiding in, remaining a part of, connecting with the vine and with one another, the other branches. Nadia Bolz-Weber says that not only are we dependent upon Jesus, but our lives are uncomfortably tangled up together. The Christian life is a viney, branchy, jumbled up mess of Jesus and others. Philip mentors the eunuch. We all get wet together. Philip and the eunuch alike. Now, am I the only one who thinks it's weird that we don't have a name for the eunuch? Well, honestly, this is often the case when we deal with people who are different from us. We often identify them with a label. That's the bald guy. That's the gay guy. That's the mentally ill woman. That's the band geek. That's the Democrat. That's the Republican. That's the ADHD kid. That's the jock, the brain, the widow, the divorced man, the stoner, the emo, and the goth. We often don't name people. We just categorize them. We know the category that people fit into, and for many people, that just takes care of that. But no, it doesn't. When the Spirit of God is set loose, labels aren't sufficient. As we are baptized, we are named. And so today I want to give the eunuch a name. I'm tired of calling him the eunuch. I want to give him a name. I think I'll call him Ahmed. And there is nothing that can prevent Ahmed, not the eunuch, but Ahmed, from being baptized today. There is nothing that can prevent Ahmed from entering fully into the Jesus story. There is nothing that can prevent any of us from going deep into the waters of new identity, deep into the waters of death and resurrection. Nothing, not my ethnic background, not my history, not my divorce, not my past, not my sexual orientation, not my skin color, not my crazy family, not my income or lack thereof, not my superior education or my lack of education, not my mental illness, not my stupid or smart choices. Nothing, there is nothing that prevents you and me from entering fully into the Jesus story. The author of 1 John would have us know that this Jesus story is fundamentally about love. Beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God. God is love. In this is love, not that we loved God, but that He loved us and sent Jesus, the crucified one, to reveal that love. To go deep into the story of Jesus is to go deep into the story of love. To be baptized into the death and resurrection of Jesus is to be baptized into love. Love that gives you a name. Love that gives you an identity. Love that calls you child of God. And love that puts to death your little self-preoccupied self and brings forth a self that is freed up to serve a hurting and broken world. Can anyone or anything prevent you or me or anybody else from being taken to that kind of love? No one, nothing. The waters of baptism are deep and wide. And so, by the way, should your hearts be. It all begins with love, God's love. Let that love flow through you to others, especially others who might be remarkably different from you. The universe is expanding. Let your world expand too. Amen.